great. Another very powerful tool from the book was the power of mysteries or cliffhanger types of advertisements. Give me an example and explain why that works.
Begin your message with a puzzle. How could it possibly be that even though we've only been in business for a year and a half, our sales have skyrocketed compared to our competitors? What could it be about us? Now you've got your audience leaning in to the next thing you say, which is the strength of your message. Now in order to solve the mystery, and we all want to solve mysteries, there's this human tendency called need for closure. We need to closure on the questions that are confronting us. To get that closure, they have to pay attention to your message in order to solve the mystery. I learned how to do this in my classroom. When I saw the power of mystery stories, I started at the beginning of every lecture. I would start with a mystery. I would say, I'm going to give you something that is puzzling on its face. If you listen to the rest of this lecture here in class, at the end of the class, you will be able to solve this mystery. Eric, typically 5 minutes before the end of every class, I see the same thing happening among my students. They start zipping up their backpacks, they start putting away their pens, they start closing up their laptops, they're poised, it's almost on the starting line, ready for the bell to ring. None of that happened when I began with a mystery. And so now, this is one of the things I try to do at the beginning of every major section of the books I write. I begin with a mystery, and no one has noticed it. No one has noticed that I use that particular device because the mystery grabs people by the collar and pulls them into the story. They're not thinking about devices. They're thinking about the answer, what information do I need to get me to this answer? And if we arrange it correctly, the information they need is about the strengths of your case. That's what solves the mystery.
Well, it worked on me. I read the book all the way through to the end. One of the principles of influence, as you said earlier in this session, was authority. And yet in persuasion, you point out that counter-arguments tend to be more powerful than arguments. And I wonder if that has implications for what we're seeing now in political campaigns, where negative ads tend to dominate. Why does it work that way? And is that a correct interpretation of what's going on?
It is correct. And the reason that counter-arguments are more powerful than arguments is that they puncture the opponent's position and render the opponent either, on the one hand, not knowledgeable enough to have a full understanding of the situation, or, and this is the one that's most devastating, not honest enough to be telling you the whole truth. That interpretation doesn't just apply to the particular issue at hand, it applies to subsequent issues that your opponent would try to raise. If you've punctured his or her credibility, then that carries across the border to other issues. Very powerful. It's a torpedo of undermining that person's credibility, and that's why counter-arguments are so powerful.
You've talked in the book about how environment can be a powerful persuader, operating below the level of consciousness. Can you give us an example of how an environment can make a bigger difference than anyone realizes in the way they approach a task or make a decision?
When we encounter a problem that just isn't yielding to the approaches that we've taken, we've tried to overcome it in a variety of ways, and so we need some creative, out-of-the-box thinking. So we call a meeting of our team for a brainstorming session. What's a persuasive step we can take to increase significantly the likelihood of creative, out-of-the-box, open, expansive thinking? It is to move to a room with a high ceiling and glass walls, because in open, expansive spaces, people think in open, expansive ways. There's research to show that people are more creative out of doors than inside. It's for the same reason. Out of doors, there are no limits. There are just open skies and spaces. So people get cued in that direction. There's a study that done in France that makes this point about the power of place and the cues of a place that bring us to a particular way of thinking. It was done in a shopping mall, and researchers had an attractive young man walk up to young women walking alone, stop them, give them a compliment, and say, you know, I wonder if you could give me your phone number. When they did so in front of a variety of different kinds of shops, a shoe store, a clothing boutique, a bakery, they had very low success. 13.5% of the instances got a phone number. But if they asked in front of one particular kind of shop, success doubled. It was a flower store. Because flowers are associated with romance. And so, even though it was a risky thing to do, to give your phone number to a perfect stranger, when you're focused on romance, even in the background, it channels your attention. Remember that study with the furniture store. What seems more important changes. What you search for and how you respond in that moment is based on where you have been directed attentionally in that moment, even in the background. Now, the interesting thing about this study was that when the researchers interviewed these women afterward and asked, so of all these stores, which of the products in those stores do you like better? And they said, it was the bakery. I like bakery more. But bakery didn't produce phone numbers. Flowers did. Flowers are associated with romance. Cheese Danish are not.
And all this happens on an unconscious level.
All on an
I'm sure
unconscious
that there are
level.
many people who will read your book and say, well, that could never happen to me. I'm a very rational person. I can rise above it. And yet, one particular anecdote from your research that rocked you back on your heels shows that this is not just something that you might be acculturated to, like flowers and romance.
Right.
It's something that's hardwired into our brain from an early age.
Yes.
Could you describe that?
It was a study done in Belgium. Researchers brought subjects into an experiment and showed them a series of photographs of household objects, toasters, blenders, and in the background of the photograph, there was a figure standing either alone, right? That was for a third of the subjects saw that. Another third saw two figures standing apart from one another. A third of the subjects saw two figures standing shoulder to shoulder, together. In all of the cases, the researcher got up from the table and accidentally spilled a number of items onto the floor. And the question is, which of the subjects get down on their knees, help the researcher pick up these scattered items on the floor spontaneously without being asked? And there's no question. If people have been put in mind of the concept of togetherness, they become more helpful. They're more willing to be cooperative and to be of assistance. Right? Now, that's all consistent with what we've been talking about. That's not what took my breath away when I read this particular feature of the study. The subjects were 18 months old. They were babies. And this process is so fundamental, so primitive in us, that it works on 18-month-old children, and 3 times as many of them help after they've been exposed to the concept of togetherness.
So you can't help but conclude that this is just the way we are built.
That's exactly right. We are built to be receptive to this kind of connection between what's in our attention and what we see as relevant for us to find it as important and relevant for us to act in ways that are consistent with.
Let's end with something that is part of your research, part of your book, but will help people live better lives.
Yeah.
And to that end, you quote the Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, who was asked to answer this question: what scientific concept, if appreciated properly, would most improve people's understanding of the world? You know, it ties in with persuasion. How did Dr. Kahneman answer that?
It's interesting because he's normally associated with something called prospect theory, the idea that under conditions of uncertainty, we weight losses more heavily than the possibility of gains. He didn't mention that as the thing that he thought was most important for all of us to know, not the thing that won him the Nobel Prize. He said, nothing is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. Something he called the focusing illusion, and something that we've been alluding to in this conversation. While you are focused on something, while you are thinking about something, its importance in your mind jumps, just skyrockets, and the the downstream consequences of that are that you then search for information relevant to that particular concept, and you act in ways that are appropriate with the now more important level of that concept in your mind.